let's continue. Now after everything is set here, you get a ready to use config object. And let's go back to the server. Now remember, config here calls the get store method after everything has been set. So let's check what it's doing. So here's where in the config you have to declare, what kind of database you'll be using, which is the store.type here. And if in case you're going to use PostgreSQL, as the config assumes that you'd have set an address, a username and password, all the fields necessary for the database to connect or other work. So, and here we just check whether he is set, whether they are set or not. Something I think now with the functional options, this will be an issue, So
yeah, I think we might frame it as something like new server with store, isn't it?
yeah,
And it's probably because there could be different types. I mean, I think there's only one type right now, but it could be with PostgreSQL, with Mongo store,
sure,
something like that.
yeah. So
Because anytime you have a thing like your cfg.store.type, that's a string, and
yeah, that's
you match PostgreSQL. So, but somebody could just misspell that, couldn't they? And it's they could just write Postgres without the QL, and then it doesn't work. So the functional option would be ideal because then it's in the name with PostgreStore, and the compiler won't compile it if you misspelt it. Second best thing would be to have some defined constant, wouldn't it? Like store dot Postgres, and then they can use that when they call you, and again the compiler will catch misspellings and typos. Also, the IDE will auto-complete to show them what's available. That's lovely.
Yeah.
It's really nice to see if you have something that can be one of 5 different things and you don't know what they are, you just start typing the name of the constant and the IDE completes it for you or shows you a pick list.
Yeah, actually, these are a good candidate for refactoring the config area.
Yeah, and in fact, since there is only one valid store type, we don't really need a switch statement with just one non-default case, do we? So we would just say if the store type is not Postgres, then fail.
Yeah. Earlier on the project, I was using Mongo, and I was trying to find what database actually is easier for me to use. I have I have experience with both of them, but I don't have any experience with Go using Mongo.
Yeah.
So I also had a case here for Mongo, and I'll show you later here in the store. I have an abstraction, an interface where abstracts the nitty-gritties of each databases, and just each database implements a common interface, both Mongo and Postgres.
Yeah, that's really nice. I guess that's store.Store is that interface, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've got many a project with an interface called something like store.Store.
Actually, mine is called exactly that. Exactly store.Store.
Yeah, and it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think, one of my secrets of the trade as a consultant slash mentor is anytime I look at someone's program and they're defining some interface, that's almost always a mistake. That sounds surprising, perhaps, because we're always hearing about how great interfaces are in Go and how useful they are, and that's true, but you should never write any. What you should do is you should consume other people's interfaces. You should use IO Reader and Writer and so forth. But you probably shouldn't be defining a bunch of interfaces yourself, partly because if there's only one implementation of them, then you don't need the interface. Just use the concrete type. It's a lot easier, isn't it? And if there are multiple implementations, that's great, but they usually aren't. And one of the few cases where I think it does make sense is a store interface, because an interface creates an abstraction, doesn't it? It's saying, I know what this thing does, but I don't care how.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is a perfect use of interfaces.
And then I wanted to spare myself the effort of when something changes in the database layer, the changes cascade all the way to the API. You have to refactor all these other packages that you shouldn't, you wouldn't have to if you just discovered, common methods and put them in an interface.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, you know, I think you've touched on an important point there, which is basically what people sometimes do is they say, I know I'm going to have some sort of store interface. Let's just sit down and write it. What's the method set? And they do that. And then they find later on that actually those weren't quite the right methods.
Yeah.
We missed out some, or we had ones that we ended up not using, or their signature is wrong or something, the API is bad. What they should have done, or what I recommend people do, this is helpful, is to just start out using some concrete type. Just a very easy to implement one, memory store or something. It's probably just a map, isn't it? Or a slice or something.
Yeah.
Use memory store for everything, and then you'll find as you use it, what methods do you need to call on it? What do they need to take? What do they need to return? What do the semantics need to be? Once you've done that and you've got everything working with your memory store, now you can replace it with an interface because you know exactly what the interface is. The program sort of wrote it for you, didn't it? I'm a big believer in not designing stuff up front. I just start doing stuff and let the design emerge.
Yeah.
Program usually knows better than I do what the design should be.
Yeah. So we continue.
Yeah.
Okay, so
It's a bit disappointing so far, I have to say, because I haven't really found anything that needs significant refactoring. It's so well polished.
I think I'm also surprised. I'm never that confident with this project because this is my first, project that I'm really putting myself out there and letting people critique, people from the
Yeah.
community, everyone,
Well,
and some people see me as an expert, but in the real sense, I'm just learning like they are. I'm no expert. I'm not even near an expert.
yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm not putting you down in the slightest, but an expert is just someone who's 2 pages ahead of you.
yeah,
And so to everybody, someone else who knows one more thing than they do, they seem like a massive expert. And you think, wow, when I get to that guy's level, then I'll really be doing it, kind of thing. My imposter
yeah,
syndrome will be cured, and I'll feel like a real developer.
yeah,
What you
sure.
don't realize is when that happens, which will be next week, you feel just the same as you do now.
Yeah, it never ends. It's a cycle.
Whatever you already know seems relatively trivial and obvious to you, but amazing
Yeah,
to someone else.
yeah,
This is why it's so valuable to do what you're doing, which is
yeah,
put yourself out there, show someone your program, say, here it is. I'm not claiming this is perfect, but, it does something.
yeah. It gets things done, right?
Yeah, if we
Yeah,
absolutely had to find things to carp about or nits to pick or whatever, one thing we could maybe look at is like this log.Fatal call here, like at line 106. If some of this
honestly.
data connection stuff is invalid or empty,
Okay.
then we call log.Fatal, and that has the effect of logging that message and terminating the program, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Uh,
one principle I like to use is to say only func main actually has the right to terminate the program.
okay.
What should everybody else do? Well, they should return some error and effectively ask main, is it okay to terminate? Do you want to terminate? Because main may say, no, that's
Oh,
fine. Actually, we can
okay.
carry on. We can just prompt the user to correct the information or whatever, that's fine.
Sure.
If you call log.Fatal or os.Exit or panic, then effectively that's it, isn't it?
Yeah.
You take that choice away from your user. Think about somebody using your library other than you. You've made it
Okay.
impossible
Yeah.
for them to trap that situation because you just
Sure.
exited. And the worst thing is they don't even know that that can happen
Yeah.
unless they
Yeah.
happen to find this line deep in the code. Oh my God, this program can exit unexpectedly.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes
Whereas
sense.
if
Makes sense.
everybody just returns errors, then you can sort of trace that flow, can't you?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And this function returns error because you clearly knew that, didn't you? You
Yeah.
knew I'm potentially going to have to return an error, so it's already in the
Yeah.
signature, so you can just do that.
Yeah.
And it's we return we sort of create the error missing Postgres config variable, but we don't say which. It would be nice to say which one was empty, wouldn't it?
Yeah, sure.
Now, can we avoid writing something like if address is empty string, then return error missing address? If username is empty, doing that twice starts to make us feel a bit tired. Doing it 4 times feels very wrong. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes we just embrace the drudgery and just write 4 if statements. That's perfectly okay. It really annoys people used to other languages where they just wouldn't do that, but it's all right in Go. But we would probably want to write some little function like ensure non-empty or error, right?
Yeah.
And we just pass it those 4 things and just say, if any of these things is empty, then give me an error that tells me which one.
Let me ask you, how do you feel about if-else statements that span more than three cases?
I try not to write else because I
Or
usually,
switch?
I usually prefer to return inside the if branch so that then we don't need else, because if we're still here, obviously the if condition was false.
I was thinking more in the lines of like this statement here, because I had actually the reason for me using short circuit logic here, operator here, is I was trying to avoid if else, if else, and at the same time I didn't want to write switch because I thought it would clutter the code.
Yeah, I think poor old switch statements sometimes get abused, don't they?
Yeah.
I think the best use of a switch is to take different action depending on the value of one variable.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, yeah,
we wouldn't
okay.
write like case address equals empty string, case username equals empty string. These are about different variables, and it's just
Yeah,
basically a way of avoiding writing if statements.
yeah, sure.
But
Yeah,
what we could ask ourselves is, do we even need to do this, right? Because
yeah,
if any of these is missing, the Postgres connect statement probably won't work.
yeah, that's
And
true.
even if they are all supplied, that might still fail. So maybe we just don't need to worry about it. Maybe we just say, hey, if you can connect, then obviously you gave me all the right credentials. If you can't, that's on you.
Yeah, true.
It looks like Postgres Connect returns what? Connection and error?
Yeah,
PostgreSQL an error. Yeah, so that's fine. So it'll just be nil, missing password or something, won't it?
yeah. Actually, this is my implementation. It's an internal implementation in the store package
Right.
for specific. Yeah,
That's perfect. Yeah, I suggest we just be bold and radical and just delete that entire if statement.
yeah, sure. You don't need it.
Yeah. You don't need to write a comment saying that you don't need it. Just delete it.
Let me just.
And
Oh
that can go
yeah,
too.
yeah. That can go. Now looks all clean.
Great. Feels good, doesn't it? I love to
Yeah.
delete code. That's my favourite thing to do. A very good developer that I know once said that a good programmer will wear down the delete key before any other key on the keyboard.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot.
Actually, now I think it makes sense now. The main will be the one responsible for terminating this. If at all any of this is missing,
Yeah.
because connect then will return an error.
Yeah, and since there is only one store type, we don't need the switch statement either, do we?
Yeah.
Why don't we just rename
Sure,
this method
sure.
to get Postgres store?
Yeah, sure. So this one should go. Oh,
Yeah, then we don't need these local variables either.
which ones? The configs?
Yeah, so why don't you just pass the cfg.store.postgres to the connect?
CFG. Okay, I'll have to refactor also the connect method. So
Yeah, instead of taking four things, it can just take that one
yeah,
thing, can't it? You've got a struct there by
yeah.
the look of it.
I think I can note it somewhere here because that would take much of our time
Yeah,
refactoring also the connect.
yeah. In fact, this method will disappear altogether, won't it? Because you can just call
Yeah,
Postgres Connect directly, or probably get rid of Postgres Connect and call it Get Postgres Store.
I don't know. I think that would remind me when I will be refactoring later.
Yeah. This happens a lot, actually. Once you start working on something, you go, oh, I can tweak this here, I can get rid of that, I can tighten this up. And then when you look at what's left, you just go, you know what, I don't even need this. Which is great.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, it brings me back to the idea. Someone once told me, don't anticipate. Like, for instance, here, you would have said, I'm anticipating that I would use another database, which
Yeah.
in any case, there's only one database at any given time in use.
Yeah, and even if there isn't, don't make me call some get store method and pass a string saying which kind of store I want. Just give me two different methods.
Sure.
Get Postgres store, get Mongo store. Then the
Yeah.
compiler can make sure that I chose one of the available options and that I spelt it right.
Yeah.
And
I
it's just less
agree.
paperwork.
Yeah.
I love getting rid of paperwork.
I guess everyone does.
Yeah. So
So,
it's easy to see how this stuff
yeah.
comes to being, isn't it? I think one important thing to say is when you're refactoring and you think, wow, I can get rid of this stuff, that doesn't mean you did anything wrong, does it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It's easy to frame it to yourself as thinking, I made a mistake here and wrote more code than I needed. But if it is a mistake, it's one that we all make, and basically you didn't know that you didn't need it until you'd written it.
Yeah, I agree.
I had this with a student project we were working on, and we were doing something like, constructing the Mongo ID for the document that we just wrote to the database. And as we looked at it, we refactored and it got smaller and smaller and smaller and more efficient. And then we just realized, actually, Mongo does this already. we don't even need a method here.
Sure, yeah.
But we wouldn't have arrived at that realization until we'd worked out
Yeah,
exactly what it is the method was supposed to do, and then we knew that Mongo already did that.
yeah,
So this is just part of the standard process, I would say. If you find yourself writing a program and then rewriting or deleting big chunks of it, that doesn't mean you're a bad developer. It means welcome to my world. you know, welcome to our lives. This is actually how we work.
yeah. So sometimes when you're like in a work setting, and I don't know how some people usually view it. Sometimes there are weeks where you haven't made any forward progress, but you've been just refactoring, and to some people that doesn't seem like a good indication of progress. I don't know
Mm.
whether you've had such experience before.
Oh yeah, all the time. And I think your own feelings are generally a good guide to whether you're actually achieving anything or not. I mean, you
Yeah,
may you may have done a ton of work, and you feel inside that it hasn't been useful, and it probably hasn't. But you may feel it's been super useful, and I feel so much better about the program. I understand it better. I know the program is better. Everybody else understands it. It's closer to what we want.
yeah,
But you just can't sort of demonstrate to anyone why it's better. If the manager asked, "What have you been doing all week?" you can't really show them anything except a bunch of commits.
yeah,
But you have to say to them, "Look, just take my word for it. We feel better about this, and so it was useful work."
So sometimes I would also risk for just to get to that point where you feel good about your code and it works as intended and uses the minimum code possible to achieve its goal.
Yeah. I use this question a lot in consulting and mentoring, and I just say to people, how do you feel about this code? And sometimes people just look at me like, what do you mean? I don't even understand what you're asking. Like, where do my feelings come into this? But I would argue they absolutely do, because it's just a way of saying, the 90% of your brain that you're not conscious of is telling you this isn't right, isn't it?
Yeah.
So listen to that part of your brain, because it has useful things to say.
Yeah. Sure.
After a while, you just learn to trust it a bit. And good engineering leaders trust their engineers' instincts.
Yeah. Actually, I think from a personal experience, that instinct is what has led me through most of the difficult moments and saved me a lot of stress and pain.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
The most annoying thing that I tell people, which is
Yeah.
nonetheless true, is every
Yeah.
time they bring me some really hard problem in Go and just say, I just can't figure out how to do this, I always tell them the same thing, which is, well, don't do that. But what do you mean? We have this
Yeah.
terrible problem, and I'm like, look, we can probably solve this problem because we're really smart, and if we put enough time and energy into it, we'll solve it. But maybe we
Yeah.
don't need to. Can we just reorganize things so that we just don't have this problem? Well, 9 times out of 10, you can. And this absolutely blows people away. They're like, I can't believe this guy's problem-solving ability, but he never actually solved any problems. He just deleted them.
You kind of like postponed them.
Yeah, or you just say, it always turns out, if you dig into it and you say, why do we have this problem? Why is it that we have to do this complicated, horrible thing? And the answer is, well, because of this other part of the program. You say, well,
Yeah.
maybe we just change that part so we don't need to do this. Now everything is easy.
Yeah, sure.
That drives people absolutely crazy until they get the idea themselves and they're like, oh, yeah, this is great. Probably shouldn't have said that. Giving away too many trade secrets.